So in today's video, looks like we have a box from Gen Sales. What exactly are you working on today?
Well, we've got a customer that brought in a set of Minneapolis-Moline G1000 tractor heads. I believe it's a 504 cubic inch engine, and he's restoring this tractor and wanted us to go through the heads, and he also needed some parts. And I checked around and found that Gen Sales were able to provide at least some of the things he needed. We've got gasket set, rod bearings, and a set of rings here for him.
So parts on these are kind of hard to come by. What era is this engine from?
I think this is probably maybe mid to late 60s. I didn't catch exactly what year it was, but I'd kind of looked up one of those model tractors, and it seems to me like that's kind of the years they were made.
Okay, so it's a 6-cylinder engine, but you've got a cylinder head up here that just has 2 cylinders on it, looks like.
Yeah, this engine is one that they've built with 3 separate heads on there, each head covering 2 cylinders. And same way with the cylinder assemblies, you'll have 2 pistons that are together in basically a cylinder block, but there's 3 of them on there, and then it has a common crankcase that houses the crankshaft and the camshaft all together.
So kind of weird compared to a lot of the agricultural stuff that we work on nowadays, but you know, it's kind of older. So going through here, getting the heads torn down, anything specific, unique about the cylinder heads?
Well, nothing really too unique other than at this point here where I'm popping those springs off, I found snap rings around each valve stem. I'm not sure if they were original or if it's something somebody else put on there. I don't recall seeing those on these heads, but then I haven't seen enough of these heads to really know. But there's a snap ring on there so that if your keepers come out or the top of the valve stem breaks, it'll prevent the valve from dropping down into the cylinder and, you know, having a very catastrophic failure.
Okay, so popping out freeze plugs on each end as well. You're going to go through and get these things baked, I assume, and
yeah, we'll put these, get them all tore down here, put them in the oven, bake them, so we can blast them, get all the grease, dirt, rust out of them, and try and make it like a brand new casting to start with again.
Okay, so you did this work. I think you started on these in December.
Yeah, from looking at some of our footage on the video here, this actually was in December when I started on these heads. And, you know, you just get busy on other stuff. We had some trouble finding parts. Had a real hard time finding the valves and guides. And luckily our customer stumbled across someone that had brand new valves for him, although we were only able to get 6 new intakes and 4 new exhausts. So I did have to go through the old exhaust valves, and I salvaged the best 2 to reuse again in these heads, and it'll be fine. They weren't that bad, but the intake valves were so rusty and thin from having been used probably more than once. Probably had more than one valve job done on the intake valves, so they were quite thin and then also very rusty from sitting around.
Yeah, so you work on old stuff like this, and you get to a point where either parts are completely obsolete and you can't even get parts and you have to use what you already have, or you know, you can get parts but they are so expensive that oftentimes the customer is not interested in spending the money that it would take to buy new parts.
Right. And a lot of times at that point they start wanting you to just kind of cobble things together, and you can only do so much of that. At some point you have to have some new parts or figure out a way to repair things without the new parts. And you'll see a little bit later in this video, I did an alternative type repair to the valve guides to make them new again without having to actually replace the entire original valve guide.
So again, this is just a restoration. Is he planning on using this in the field or anything?
I kind of gathered it'll get used a little bit, but I don't think it's ever going to be certainly won't be anyone's main tractor to farm with. It may be more kind of just for fun or exhibition type stuff.
Okay. But in the rest of this video, after you get these heads cleaned up, torn down and cleaned up, you'll kind of go through all of the machine work it takes to make them right again, right?
Yeah, I'm going to go through and try to show everything we do on these heads, basically start to finish, to make them as close to being like new as we can again.
Is there a lot of work that goes into these compared to your modern John Deere cylinder heads, or?
The work is all similar. In fact, what I ended up doing with the valve guides here is very similar to what we would do on a modern John Deere head. It's not that much different, other than just the heads themselves are a little bit different from what we normally see. I don't know if you can tell on these, but these have what they call, some of them refer to as power cells, that has a bit of a combustion chamber in the head there, where the exhaust valve is recessed down in, and the injector sprays in from one side into that power cell, goes right across the exhaust valve into that power cell. So they are very unusual as far as the type of combustion that's going on in there.
Okay. Do you talk about that at all later on, maybe?
I don't remember.
Okay. All right. Well,
it's been too long since we did this.
But anyway, we needed to record a little bit of an intro to this video since we didn't have any audio on it to begin with, but kind of just going through the process here, and the video will show hopefully a pretty nice looking final product at the end.
Yeah, and they did come out very nice.
So, all right, stay tuned.
Hey everybody, we're back today, going to work on these G1000 Minneapolis-Moline heads again. I've got them up here on the bench. I think last time we left off we was doing the tear down and the cleaning on them. So anyway, they're all cleaned up, and we need to start working on getting the valves and guides squared away on them. You can see I have all three heads here on the bench, and I also have a manual here from Gen Sales. Funny thing, they were watching some of our videos and noticed that we were using one of their manuals in, I think is an engine we built for a Massey Ferguson tractor, a little 3-cylinder Perkins engine. But they reached out to us, said, hey, how great it was that they saw their product in our video. And on this engine here, they offered to send us a manual for this engine. So I want to thank them for sending that out to us. And I just wanted to show you, this is quite the manual. I'm surprised the information that's in here. I think this is actually a reproduction of an original factory service manual. But here I am doing the valves, and sure enough, on this page has a lot of the specifications I'm going to need. Very shortly here, we're going to check the valve clearance, valve guide clearance, and you'll see here it shows I'm supposed to have 2 to 4 thousandths. I mean, there's just all kinds of information all through this book about anything you can imagine working on this old tractor. Back in this section is on valves, and I am really surprised. There are, like, I think I counted 14 pages here on the entire procedure to go through to check these valves and do the heads from start to finish. Yeah, actually 15 pages. Just a wealth of information here. I'm really impressed with this manual. So thanks, Gen Sales, for sending this out to us. This is going to help with what we're doing here. But anyway, as I said here, back on the valve guides, it's showing us that valve stem clearance in guide should be 2 to 4 thousandths. It gives the dimensions of what the valves are supposed to be. So I have gone over here and used a micrometer, and I measured. It's hard to do that and have this on here. Anyway, measured my valve stem. I transferred that dimension over to my valve guide bore gauge, and I can't do all this with one hand. So you're just going to have to take my word for it. But anyway, when I have this gauge set so it reads on 0, that is the size of the valve stem. Now when I put this gauge into the bore of the valve guide, and I've kind of gone through and checked this, kind of seeing what we have here beforehand, and I know this guide here was one of my best ones in all of the heads. When I put that in here, that measures just about right around 3/1000 clearance. And again, the book there said we were supposed to have 2 to 4. So I think we're in a real good spot with that valve guide there, especially for a used one. But that's not the norm on these heads. I go back over here and check this exhaust, and you'll see here when I'm up in closer to the top there, I've got 4.5 clearance. And as I come out of the guide here towards the combustion chamber side, look at that needle. Just goes round and round. There is 10 thousandths clearance, 10 thousandths of wear in that valve guide. The intake here next to it probably won't be quite as bad. They generally don't wear as much as the exhaust does. But yeah, there's I'm already at the loose side there, 4 thousandths. And as I come on out, I gain probably at least 3 more thousandths of clearance. So we are going to have to do some work on the valve guides here. The problem is when I tried to find valve guides for these heads, I won't say they're not available, but some of them that I found had been sitting around for a long time, were quite rusty, and quite expensive. So we're going to do something a little bit different on these. Let me go over here and grab one of these inserts, show you. Falling back on SBI here to help us out. They're one of our sponsors. I have a universal replacement guide here, and what I'm going to do is drill out the existing guide, and we'll press this inside the existing guide to basically sleeve the guide and make it like new again. And while that's going on, I'm going to set the heads up over here on the surfacer, start surfacing them, kind of kill 2 birds with 1 stone here. So this can be running while we're back over here on the guide machine there, drilling these to install those inserts. So let me set the camera up here on the surfacer, and then I'll pull away from that and be putting the guides in. We'll put the camera on that also. So here we go, see what happens. And there we have it. All 3 heads have been surfaced. All the important areas have cleaned up. This still shows some pitting in the chambers from where they sat with water. The other 2 heads both look real nice. The very first head I surfaced, I believe it's this one here that I didn't put any Dicom on, showed to be a little bit warped when I started on it. When I made that second cut, it had not completely cleaned. So I put the Dicom on the other 2 heads so I could show that, but they did not appear to be warped. So too little, too late. But anyway, now that the surfaces are done, we're ready to move over to the guide machine, and we'll drill and put those inserts in the existing valve guides. Okay, so now we're getting ready to put the new valve guides in. And as I talked about before, we're not going to actually drive out and drive in a new valve guide like this. We're going to put an insert inside the existing valve guide. So let me get this bolted down on here before it ends up on my big toe. I've never had that happen yet. Now it probably will since I mentioned that. Okay, there we've got the head bolted on, clamped on, so that we can roll it over, work on it from all sides. And to begin with, we're going to level it here on the machine. On this machine here, the machine itself is set up level, and then whenever you mount heads on here to do your work, I know you might come in here, see if you can show. We have the bubble here on the level. Anyway, that we just bring adjust the table until the bubble is in the middle, and we should be squared up. Here's the other thing we've run into on this. These valve guides measure, the intake there is about 4 3/8. I think is about where we're at. Yeah. But the valve guides I have are not quite that long. They're better than an inch short from that. So what I'm going to do is drill the existing guide out so that we can press this one in, but I'm actually going to have to cut and press 2 pieces in. There will be a splice in there. So I'll put the long portion of the guide towards the combustion chamber side, and then up here on top there will be a shorter piece in there, probably roughly about an inch long, that butts up against it, and it'll be absolutely fine. I've done this many times when we were doing a guide like this, that we didn't have one that was quite long enough, and it does the job just fine. We'll start out with a drill down through the existing guide. Once it's drilled, then we ream it, and then it'll be ready to press those guides in. Let's see, I think we can probably run this probably about, maybe about 250 RPM. Just using a little bit of our crankshaft grinder coolant on that. Helps keep the drill cool as we're going through. It's a pretty long guide to go through. Barely made it through there. I'm going to switch out, put the reamer in. I'm doing this without changing anything because it'll help it stay on center with the guide. If I drill all of them first and then come back with the ream, it can change just a little bit, and I'd like to keep this as concentric as possible. and that should be a press fit for that guide to go in. We'll drive that in after we get done drilling all of them. Who's here? No one. There's something out there blowing in the wind today that keeps setting off the gate buzzer. Makes me think customers have pulled in. If you hear that sound in our videos, it's because somebody came through the gate. Those are long valve guides. I was getting a little worried there. The drill may not be long enough. Always go through kind of easy when I come to the end, because it's real easy to break the end of the guide out if you're putting too much pressure on when you get to the very end of it. Okay, all 4 guides are drilled and reamed on that head. Okay, you can see down in there just the shell of the original guide left in there. I think what I'll do here is I'll drive the bottom part of the guide in, and then we're going to have to take some guides out in the other shop and get them on the lathe, and we'll cut some short pieces off and then come back and we'll drive that piece in from the top. So as I talked about, the intake guides on these heads measure 4.375 inch. My replacement guides I'm going to put in there only measure 3.125, so that means I need to have another inch 250 to make my 4.375. So I think we'll put the 3.125 in from the bottom side, and then I'm going to cut one of these guides, cut a length 1.250 off of it, and put that in from the top side. That'll make my splice just above in this area here, probably along about right there or so. I think that'll be a good place to have a splice in there. Everything will work fine. On my exhaust guide, they measure 3.875. I don't want to have just a little short piece here at the top. I'd like to have a little bit more length to that. So I think I'm going to take my 3.875 guide, cut that down to 2.625, and then add the same 1.250 on there. So we'll cut all the pieces 1.250, cut the exhaust guides, the longer piece, to 2.625, put that in from the bottom, and then the short piece in from the top. So let's head out to our brand new lathe. This will be my first job on the new lathe, and let's see if we can just part those off. Real simple job for a new machine.
Okay, so you have clearance.
Okay, so let's close the doors. So can I start it?
Yep. Sit forward. Here, hit the green button. Since you went to MDI, you can just hit.
There it goes. We'll put on some coolant.
Okay, and then you gotta go back to handle jog.
Handle jog. There it is. Okay, so now let's stop this. There is our first official part made in our new lathe. I can't believe that only cost us $50,000.
Yeah.
You know, everybody makes comments about you just being the young whippersnapper, and they all want to hear everything from me. This is one of the things you taught me, was using these.
Yeah. Since this is a pretty loose tolerance operation, that'll get you plenty close to just use the same numbers on the digital readout.
Yeah, because we have 1/8 of an inch leeway.
Tolerance.
Yeah, 1/8 of an inch tolerance on everything we're doing here.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not a big deal. Everything about this makes me nervous. Turn my coolant on. Okay, so now I can feed it in with this button here and control the speed with this.
Yep.
So you ready?
Yep.
Hope everything's right.
Now each part only costs $25,000.
No, we're better than that because we've got 4 parts now.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah, so that each
12,500.
Yeah, each one of these parts is only 12,500.
Sick.
That's pretty cool.
This thing's gonna pay itself off quick.
We've put the guide in here the same way, using our same 0 starting point. Go forward. Back here in the main shop, we've got the guides cut in sections the way we need them to be. These here on this side, this part being cut a little bit shorter, these cut to 1.25 inches. Those two together will be long enough to do our exhausts at 3.875, and a full length guide here along with the 1.25 inch piece that we cut will be long enough to do the 4 3/8 inch intake guides. Got the head over here all drilled. You can still see the shell of the existing factory guide in there, but they are all drilled out, and you can see on the top side here drilled, ready for our inserts to be put on the inside. So let me see if I can get started on that. We'll set the camera off to the side here. Okay, so I'm ready to drive the guides in this. So the first thing I'm going to do is spray just a little bit of press fit lube into these guides. Hope I'm not blocking the camera there too much, but I probably am. And then I'm going to take a brush here and run it up through there. That'll spread that press fit lube around just a little bit. Now, after drilling these guides, they are quite thin on the top side here. And I'm afraid if I try to drive any guide down in this way, unless I am just lined up absolutely perfect, I could crack the top of this, and I don't want to do that. I would not be surprised if the very top of these intake guides crack, but we're going to cut those down a little bit smaller for seals anyway, so I don't think that'll be an issue. But I hope I don't crack anything down below here. So to keep from having issues that way, I'm going to take the short piece of our guide, and I'm going to drive in first from the bottom side and go all the way through, come out on the top just a little bit. Then I'll drive the guide in, the longer piece in from the bottom here, and once it's in where it needs to be, then I'll get on the top side and drive this back, but it'll already be in the guide and aligned at that point, so I should not have trouble with cracking anything on top. So here goes. Let's see what happens. let's start with the intakes first, which are actually the longer of the two valve guides. And I guess we'll just go ahead and do the exhaust here while we have things lined up on this side. The exhaust guide is short enough and my driver is long enough. I don't think I'll have any trouble there. But on the intakes here, my driver is going to bottom out before I get where I need to be. So I do have another driver here that is it's broken off on the end, but it is just a little bit longer. I think we can get the added reach we need. And when this is all said and done, I think I want the new guide I'm driving in here to be sticking up about a ½ an inch. Doesn't have to be perfect, but real close to a ½ an inch. Then we'll put in the longer piece from the bottom side here, and then, like I say, drive that back to it. So let's see if I can hit roughly a ½ an inch there. That's not a set in stone measurement. This has to be roughly close to the half. Okay, see where I've come through on the top side here? I think we're in a real good spot there. So now let's put in the larger section. Let's start with the longer ones that go in the intake side here. And again, I don't have a good way to put a stop on these, so I'm going to have to just eyeball each one of them. Okay, both of those are flush, right where I'd like them to be. So now let's get the shorter ones here that go in on the exhaust side. There, that one looks good. And that too looks good to me. Okay, now we can go back to the top side here. And I should be able to drive these down till I feel them bump into the longer section we put in. There it is. Hear that? Right there. There they are. So now we have our inserts inside the existing valve guides. Now I'll come back and I'll cut the top of these off, and on the intake side we'll also cut it down here for a positive seal. My positive seal that I'm using now is a little bit different than what they used 60 years ago, so I have to cut to a little bit different size there, but we can make that work. So I'll level this up once more. We're good there. So I'm going to use just a cutter to square off the top of that valve guide back down flush like what the original was. Okay, now I'll take this same pilot out and put it in a guide cutter. This cutter looks very similar, but it actually is made to cut the outside of the valve guide for the seal to fit. And these two in the center, the intakes that will get the valve stem seals, we'll just trim those off so that my new seal fits that properly. I'm going pretty gentle with that because that shell that's left on the outside is very thin. And I want to try to avoid cracking that, knocking it off there. And there we have it. From the top side here, I don't think anybody would ever know that there were valve guides in there. But we do need to ream those yet. I have my gauge set up here for size, and we are roughly around 3/1000ths. Going to have 3/1000ths clearance in that, which is right where I think we should be. But let's go through there with the reamer. There's probably some burrs and whatnot in there that need to come out. Sometimes I like running just a little bit of that coolant with the reamer. I'm going to tighten that up with the wrench. Those are some really long valve guides. Pushing the limits of my tooling here. Brush those out just a little bit. Check it with the gauge again. Yeah, we're just over 3 thousandths. Yeah, right around 3 thousandths. Let's see if a valve will go in that. Oh, look at that. Yeah, that feels nice. There's an intake. Yep. I think that's going to work. So now all I have to do is repeat that process 2 more times on the other 2 heads, and we'll have all the valve guides in. So now that we have the guides installed in these heads and fit ready to go there, we need to put some valve seats in the intake side there. You can see all the rust pitting on this head and into the valve seats. So we'll just replace those with new inserts. The exhaust already has inserts in. Looks like they must be quite hard. Very little wear on them, and being the metal they're made out of, they have not pitted like the intake has here, where they're just ground into the cast iron. So let me set the camera up over here to the side, and we will get started on installing those seats. I have a seat pocket cutter set up ready to go, 1 3/4 inch with our proper pilot that fits our valve guide real nicely. So set that in the machine, bring down here to the right height. I have the head level square to the machine at this point. Probably need just a little bit of lubrication on that pilot so it doesn't try to tie up in the valve guide. I have my seats picked out here ready to go. Should fit real nicely in those heads. So I'll bring that down till my cutter just touches the head. There we are. Use one of the seats, set the depth. These seat pockets do cut just a little bit nicer if you have some coolant on there. And I should be able to move over to the other one here. Everything's set at the same level. You can really hear how rough that is where it starts out because of all that rust pitting. Yeah, those look real nice. So I'll install my seat installation pilot, the adapter, a valve seat, my driver, and we have it. Move over to the other side. And just that quick, I have my valve seats installed. Looks like they fit real nice. So there we have it. And it does appear that I did end up with those just a little bit high. That's okay, because we can cut them down when we're finishing the valve seats, and I'd rather have plenty of meat there to be able to cut them down than wish I had some extra when I can't get my correct depth. These heads are a little heavier than they look. And there, we have our seats installed. Looks real good. So with that, we're ready to move over to the Surrey and finish the valve seats. Well, here is something I had not anticipated. You see on these valve guides how they have this tower and flange that sits down against the head and then locates the valve spring in the proper area around there. One of these was sticking up just a little bit. I don't know if it moved when I pressed my insert in, or if it had always been up a little bit, but it was probably up about 30 or 40 thousandths from being flush down against the head. So I thought, well, that's no problem. We'll just take a driver here, which happens to be an old socket, go over the top of there, and I'll put it over in the press and press that down in. Well, guess what? When I pressed that, it was tighter than I thought it would be, and I broke that flange off there. It just bang, and I had all these little pieces. So now I just created myself more work and more problems, because as you recall, I have actually two pieces in there that make up my new insert valve guide, and they're butted together right up here in this area. I don't like that. That could break off, finish breaking off the way that is now, even if I did manage to put something around here to locate the spring. So I think I'm going to have to remove this guide that I put in, and I'll go out in the lathe and I'll turn myself a piece that looks similar to this tower on the top here, and when I reinstall it with a new insert in there, I'm going to put my splice down on the other end, so that 1.25 inch long piece will be on the down on the combustion chamber side, and the 3 1/8 inch portion of the guide will be sticking up above here, so it can bridge this area and give it some strength. So hate it that happened, but things happen, and all you can do is move on, figure out what you got to do to make it right, and take care of it.